So welcome to our, well, it's not our first lecture, but it's the first one I've been able to attend. And it's absolutely a great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Now, Dr. Liz Driver has the unusual distinction of having trained and practiced both medicine and law before coming to her senses and taking a serious interest in this society and the work that it does, that we do here. And in the last decade, she has served on numerous of the society's committees and on council, where her counsel has been greatly welcome and valued. Now, of course, many of you will know Liz from her fearless leadership of hugely popular tours to India. In 2023, during the Society's bicentennial year, she led an intrepid group to follow in the footsteps of James Todd, one of the Society's founding members and its first librarian. Liz's merry band of vagabonds, some of whom are here today, made their way through the byways of Rajasthan during 2 action-packed weeks. The tour followed routes and stopped at places that Todd had visited between 1819 and 1822, as described by him in his classic book, The Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan. And next month, Liz will be leading another tour, again following in Todd's footsteps, this time through Western India, especially the Saurashtra Peninsula and Gujarat. Todd described this tour in colorful detail in his posthumous book, published in 1839, entitled Travels in Western India. And it's a testament to the success of Liz's first 1923 tour of Rajasthan that most of the people on that journey have signed on for a second helping of Todd this year, and the tour is sold out. Now, Liz's talk today provides a preamble, I think, to next month's tour, and we'll explore the reasons why Todd's long career in Rajasthan and in the neighboring regions, which had lasted some 24 years, came to an abrupt end in June of 1822, precipitating his explorations of Gujarat during the 6 months that followed, before he set sail for England in early 1823, never to return to India. Now, I will resist saying anything more about Todd, and as many of you know, once I start talking about him, it's hard to get me to shut up. And of course, you've come here today to hear Liz talk, not me. But I will say one thing, because one last thing, I see the current treasurer of the society here and an immediate past treasurer. And I want to reassure them that neither Liz nor I, either independently or in consort, have any intention of publishing a ruinously expensive book on the travels of Western India. So I'm very pleased to welcome Liz, and we look forward to hearing you.
So as Norbert has already spoken about, last year a group of fellows followed in Todd's footsteps through Rajasthan, visiting the states of which he was political agent for a really very brief period from 1818 to 1822, as he describes in quite some detail in the personal narrative sections of Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan. Here he is with his European companions, so I'm not sure who is who, but one of them is Patrick Waugh, who was his cousin and is responsible for some of the very beautiful drawings in the Annals. And Waugh's young ensign, Lieutenant Carey, who unfortunately came to a bad end towards the end of the Annals, which we'll come to, and then Dr. Duncan, the party's medical advisor. So when we were there, we pondered on why Todd was only in post for such a short time and why he left a country which he clearly loved and where he was building a home. We've already seen that Todd very rapidly established close and mutually respectful relationships with the rulers of Mewar, Udaipur, and of Bundi, where the old ruler entrusted him with his son, so really a very great honour. And Todd personally installed him on the Gadi. Some of you will remember seeing that in Bundi. So this talk aims to reassess Todd's role as political agent and to determine what went wrong. We need to look briefly at what happened in Mewar, Jodhpur, but the focus is going to be on events in Kotah. The task, as always, is hampered by the dearth of original material, and as so often, it's Todd's own writings which are the major source of historical facts. In addition, perhaps happily in a way, we have the voluminous and often vicious correspondence between Todd and his immediate superior, David Ochterlony, the resident in Delhi from December 1818, and of Malwar and Rajputana from October 1821, and also between Ochterlony and George Swinton, the secretary to the Governor-General in Council, Marquis Hastings. So to understand Todd's achievements and also the challenges he faced, we need to look at what was happening in Rajasthan at the beginning of the 19th century. The Marathas had been raiding northwest India, so coming up from the south and going into Gujarat. And the decline in Mughal power to check them had led to incursions into neighbouring Rajasthan. They became involved in Rajput internecine disputes, mainly over succession, at the invitation of the Rajput rulers themselves. And they ended up promising to pay them enormous sums of money, which of course they then couldn't pay, resulting in territory being ceded. So it was really a mess when Todd arrived. The Marathas were assisted by the Pindaris, generally described as irregular troops attached to the Maratha armies, used mainly for plunder. And Todd often used the term freebooter to describe them. One of their leaders, Amir Khan, I think rather handsome, had assisted the Marathas, but then skillfully exploited differences between the Rajput rulers, supporting whoever seemed expedient at the time. At the end of the Pindari War in 1818, British bought him off by making him Nawab of Tonk. Interesting that the British could just do this. They could solve problems by reassigning territory. And of course, he continued to cause trouble in Tonk. But Amir Khan is important to us because he played a big role in Kotah, where he had the support of the regent, Salim Singh. The end result of all this was that in almost all of the Rajput states, with Kotah being the exception for reasons which will become clear, the land was laid waste, villages burnt, trade and commerce made impossible, and there was a massive migration of population out of Rajasthan. As the British expansion came up against Maratha ambitions, 3 Anglo-Maratha wars were fought between the East India Company and the Maratha Empire. And the Third War, 1817 to 1818, led to the breakup of the Maratha Empire, and Scindia surrendered Rajasthan to the British and agreed to help them fight the Pindaris. Todd's map, of which you will all have seen a copy as it's appended to Norbert's Volume 3, proved a crucial strategic tool in this war. Todd was attached to the court of Scindia as the commander of the British escort, so effectively to keep an eye on Scindia. And the court was peripatetic, which gave him the opportunity to explore, record and map large parts of Rajasthan. Clearly, he had a considerable degree of autonomy at this stage, as well as an interest in every aspect of Rajasthan, and the local Rajput rulers saw him as someone who could help restore their fortunes. The Rajputs realised that the British would protect them from the Marathas, and between 1803 and 1823, all the Rajput states signed treaties with the East India Company. This brings us to Todd's appointment. So he was appointed and dismissed, as you can see on the slide. Critically, he was in post for only 4 years in Mewar, Kotah and Bundi, and also Sirohi, which in fact he never even went to until after he'd left, and only a few months in Mewar. So it is a very short time period that we're looking at. Note also that Todd was never political agent in Jaipur or in Bikaner, which reported directly to the resident in Delhi. When he was first appointed, Todd was effectively a free agent, reporting directly to the Governor-General in Council. And although in theory John Malcolm, the resident in Delhi, had oversight of the affairs in Kotah, Bundi and Udaipur, in practice he didn't become involved. And Todd's problems only began when David Ochterlony was appointed resident in March 1818. After the first set-to between Todd and Ochterlony, the Governor-General wrote to Ochterlony stating that he relied on Todd's discretion and judgment under Ochterlony's guidance and experience. It was a vain hope. Freitag points out that Todd's work as political agent was unique in that he approached it as a historian, on one occasion describing 400 years of history as a background to a report to Charles Metcalfe on an 1818 border dispute in Sirohi. Is he really the kind of employee you want to read all that? There's no question he was absolutely fascinated by the Rajputs and sought a link between their martial characteristics and his own Scottish ancestors. As Peabody puts it, he frequently disappears down a fantastical rabbit hole of Victorian Gothicism in his attempts to link the heroic Rajputs, Scythians and Scandinavians. Ochterlony did not share Todd's views about the Rajputs. He wrote to George Swinton in May 1823. This was after he dismissed Todd. I consider the late political agent too much of a Rajput himself to deal with the Rajputs. Fair exposition, probity and candour are the best weapons to oppose obstinacy, cunning and deceit. It does seem a somewhat paradoxical remark, as Ochterlony was famous for his love of Indian dress, customs and women. But there we are. They clearly just loathed each other. I think it shouldn't be forgotten when we look at Todd's attitude to the Rajputs that he was very much a product of the Romantic era. So he's a contemporary of Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Robert Burns, Walter Scott. And antiquarianism was all the rage. And the Rajput construct of valour, chivalry and sacrifice clearly very much appealed to Todd, and he identified with them and perhaps tended to ignore their less admirable qualities. We need to consider first what happened in Jodhpur concerning the Maharaja Man Singh, which I think perhaps illustrates this weakness in Todd's character. Todd never visited Jodhpur in the brief period he was political agent for Mewar. He was appointed in February 19, reporting directly to the Governor-General. And in May 1819, Ochterlony informed Metcalfe that Jodhpur had expressed great dissatisfaction with the arrangement because, according to the treaty, all business was to be conducted with the resident at Delhi, who by this time, you guessed it, was Ochterlony himself. So in August, Todd ceased to be responsible for Jodhpur. Sinha and Dasgupta, whom we'll come back to, point out that Ochterlony was probably unaware that a ministerial faction had usurped the Maharaja's power and that Todd was trying to oust this faction and restore power to the Maharaja, who apparently told Todd on at least 2 occasions that he had not asked for change. In any event, even Ochterlony admitted that Todd's dismissal was nothing personal and was attributable to Rajput pride that they would not deal with someone of lower rank and status. Peabody considers that the fact that Todd was based in Udaipur and was clearly biased in favour of Mawar in the numerous long-standing territorial disputes, including Saroe, was also a factor. However, I think Todd's subsequent lack of judgment concerning the personality of the Raja is quite notable. Todd was actually told not to visit Jodhpur, but he disobeyed orders and went there in November 1819, 3 months after he'd been dismissed as a political agent. Peabody comments that what exactly Todd hoped to gain from this expedition is unclear, other than satisfying an irrepressible inquisitiveness. One might somewhat sympathise with that. Todd met Man Singh several times, including a lengthy private meeting, and they clearly got on very well, exchanging gifts and discussing Marwar's history and the disputed provinces. Man Singh had copies of several manuscripts made for Todd, and they parted on very good terms. However, Todd did write in the Annals, with hindsight, of course, the biography of Man Singh would afford a remarkable picture. Human patience, fortitude, and constancy never surpassed in any age or country. But in this school of adversity, he also took lessons in cruelty. He learned therein to master, or rather disguise, his passions. And though he showed not the ferocity of the tiger, he acquired the still more dangerous attribute of that animal, its cunning. At that very time, not long after he had emerged from his seclusion, while his features were modelled into an expression of complacent self-content, indicative of a disdain for human greatness, he was weaving his web of destruction for numberless victims who were basking in the sunshine of his favour. Astonishingly, at the time that he was having all these meetings with Man Singh, he seems to have ignored his murderous activities and admired him. He says, "I received the most convincing proofs of his intelligence and minute knowledge of past history. He was remarkably well read, and at this and other visits, he afforded me much instruction. He had copies made for me of the chief histories of his family, which are now deposited in the library of the Royal Asiatic Society." He entered deeply into the events of his personal history and recounted many expedients he was obliged to have recourse to in order to save his life. The archives at the fort in Jodhpur contain immensely detailed accounts of each of the meetings between Man Singh and Todd, how long they were, where exactly they took place, but frustratingly, not what was said at the private meetings. There's also a long list of the presents that were exchanged at the last meeting. Todd tells us, "I went to take leave of the Raja. I left him in the full expectation that his energy of character would surmount the difficulties by which he was surrounded, though not without a struggle. With mutual good wishes and a request for literary correspondence, which was commenced but soon closed, I bade adieu to Raja Man and the capital of Mawar." But in the 6 months following Todd's visit, Man Singh embarked on a spate of killings. Todd tells us each day announced a numerous list of victims, either devoted to death or imprisoned and stripped of their wealth. So it seems that Todd had not achieved anything by these meetings, which he'd been told not to have, with Man Singh. We now come to Kotah. In the personal narrative, Todd describes his arrival in Kotah in February 1820, promising us that he will have more to say about the city during their halt, which is likely to be of some continuance. In fact, he had nothing at all to say until they left in September, when he explains the last 4 months was a continued struggle against cholera and deadly fever. Never in the memory of man was such a season known. This is not a state of mind or body fit for recording passing events. And although the period of the last 6 months has been one of the most eventful of my life, it has left fewer traces of these events on my mind for notice in my journal than if I had been less occupied. He tells us how they changed the site of their camp several times in an attempt to escape the heat and sickness, but to no avail. Scarcely any place can be more unhealthy than Kotah during the monsoon. We now need to consider the role of the regent of Kotah, Zalim Singh. Tantalizingly, in the personal narrative, Bob tells us of his final parting from the Maharaja and from the regent, Zalim Singh. Here he is. The man who had passed through such scenes as the reader has perused, now at the very verge of existence, could not repress his sorrow. His orbless eyes were filled with tears, and as I pressed his palsied hands, which were extended over me, the power of utterance entirely deserted. So what's all this about? And to find out, we need to turn to the very extensive history of Kotah, which Todd wrote up, as always with the benefit of hindsight, for the Annals after his return to England. And of 100 pages, 90 are almost entirely devoted to Zalim Singh. So who was he? He was a very old man by the time Todd visited in 1820, having been born in 1739 to a family of hereditary Fajdars of Kotah, meaning governor and military commander, so a position of very great power. As a young man, Zalim Singh had twice saved Kotah from defeat, first from Jaipur in 1761, and then from Holkar, whose help he'd earlier enlisted to defeat Jaipur. So clearly both his military and his diplomatic skills were outstanding. When the 10-year-old Umed Singh, here he is enjoying a tiger shoot, came to the throne in 1771, at the request of his father, Zalim Singh became the regent, thus increasing his power and effectively becoming the ruler of Kotah throughout Umed Singh's nominal reign. He disposed of all opposition, reorganized the army, reformed agriculture and land tax, reinforced the fort, built an arms factory, negotiated with the Marathas and the Pindaris, even providing Amir Khan with a fort and extensive land in order to protect Kotah from the depredations that was destroying the other Rajput states. Todd tells us Amir Khan and the regent were essential to each other. From Kotah, Khan was provided with military stores and supplies of every kind and a place of refuge. This led to another attack on Todd by Ochterlony, which illustrates the toxic nature of their relationship as early as October 1818. Zalim Singh had given Amir Khan and his family temporary refuge from the mutinying troops in the fort at Shergar. Here's Shergar last year. And Amir Khan had promised to leave at the end of the rains. He didn't, and the troops established themselves at the gate of the fort and were harassing local people. Todd wrote directly to Amir Khan to ask him to withdraw his troops and was reprimanded by Ochterlony for contacting Amir Khan without his permission. Ochterlony, who really was a master of pomposity, wrote to Todd, "I beg leave to observe that I cannot see the necessity of and confess I feel very great doubt of the propriety of your addressing any letter to Amir Khan direct, excepting in cases of special emergency. But as this is the second time that you have thought proper to write to persons whom I consider exclusively and particularly under my immediate authority, I have judged it expedient to submit the subject to the consideration of the most noble, the Governor-General, in the hope that he will be graciously pleased to define distinctly our relative situation." A substantial correspondence ensued over the next 3 months, with Todd justifying why he considered it to have been a matter of urgency for him to address Amir Khan. And it was finally closed down by the Governor General himself, who wrote to Ochterlony in December 18, copied to Todd, "It is not necessary under present circumstances to pursue this subject further. And his lordship in council is happy to be relieved from the obligation of dwelling on a reference of this nature from officers of distinguished zeal for the public service." Todd clearly admired Zalim Singh, though perhaps didn't feel much liking or sympathy for him until their final parting. And he tells us how Zalim Singh operated. His lynx-like eye saw at once who was likely to invade his authority, and these knew their peril from the vigilance of a system which never relaxed. Entire self-reliance, a police such as perhaps no country in the world could equal, establishments well paid, services liberally rewarded, character and talent in each department of the state, himself keeping a strict watch over all and trusting implicitly to none, with a daily personal supervision of all this complicated state machinery. Such was the system which surmounted every peril and not only maintained but increased the power and political reputation of Zalim Singh amidst the storms of war, rapine, treason, and political convulsions. It was clear by this time that the East India Company was becoming more important to the well-being of the Rajput States than the Marathas and the Pindaris. And in December 1817, Kotah had entered into a treaty of subsidiary alliance, the treaty being signed by Charles Metcalfe, then the resident in Delhi, and by envoys on behalf of Maharaja Man Singh. In the initial treaty, no power was vested in the regent, who Todd explains is only mentioned in the preamble to the treaty. In March 1818, 2 supplemental articles were agreed, guaranteeing the administration of the state to Zalim Singh and to his sons and successors forever, so pretty far-reaching. Todd comments, "There is not a shadow of doubt that the supplemental articles of the Treaty of Kotah, which pledged our faith in to two parties in a manner which rendered its maintenance towards both an impossibility, produced consequences that shook the confidence of the people of Rajwara in our political rectitude." Todd explains in the Annals why the British had to include the articles. To effect a treaty with the Nestor of Rajwara, Zalim Singh, was to ensure alliances with the rest of the states, which object was the very essence of Lord Hastings' policy. Thus, on general views, as well as for particular reasons, and this is, I think, is really key to this, for the resources of Kotah were absolutely indispensable, the cooperation of the regent was a measure vitally important. At first, all continued as before, with Zalim Singh going on running all aspects of the state, while Maharaja Man Singh acquiesced and focused on hunting, religion, patronizing the arts, for example, commissioning some wonderful wall paintings. Here, bears fighting and wrestling, one of Man Singh's favorite pursuits. And I particularly love the fact that the humans come off worse in these hunting scenes. The 2 men were clearly friends and frequently hunted together. And this is a painting of Maharaja Man Singh and Zalim Singh with their zenana hunting, which seems an extraordinary thing. Todd says that at the age of 70, Man Singh found himself just as much a miner as when his dying father placed him in the lap of the protector, Zalim Singh. Having said all this, Zalim Singh was apparently always deferential to the Maharaja, even banished his own son when he was disrespectful to the heir apparent. And the situation seems to have been satisfactory to all parties and was only destabilised when the treaty attempted to enshrine a delicate arrangement in legalistic terms and to set in stone the balance of power for the future. It was made worse by the fact that the supplemental articles were initially kept secret from Umed Singh. Peabody considers that Todd exaggerates the extent to which the Maharajas of Kotah were powerless vis-à-vis their Prime Minister. Todd, like most British officials of his time, had difficulty in understanding the prevalence of titular sovereigns who apparently ruled in name only, with powerful ministers, or of course, in the case of Udaipur, powerful women behind the throne. The issue came to a head when Umed Singh died in November 1819 and was succeeded by his, over on this side, by his eldest son, Kishore Singh. And we need to look carefully at these two family trees because I think they hold the key to a lot of what happened next. Todd tells us that Kishore Singh, so like his father, was more interested in religion than in ruling and would have been quite content to have left things as they were. But the youngest son, Prithi Singh, thought that the existing state of things was one of opprobrium and dishonour. And he was determined to enfranchise himself and his family. The eldest son of the regent, so that's this family, Madho Singh, was a favourite of the late Maharaj. He's been described as arrogant. He was to succeed his father as the Faujdar, and the younger son, Gordhandas, on this side, was adopted, but he was the favourite of Zalim Singh and was said to be quick, lively, intelligent, and daring. The brothers, of course, cordially detested each other. Gordhandas and Prithi Singh, close to the new Maharaj, and had considerable influence over him, and they encouraged Kishore Singh to challenge Zalim Singh's dominance over the state. Bishan Singh, the middle brother, wasn't involved in this at all. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the treaty made no provision for Gordhandas. His father had put him in charge of the grain of the entire state. He was actually put in quite a powerful position and could afford to raise his own army. So this was another problem. Arguments inevitably arose over the terms of the treaty, with the Maharaj faction arguing that Article 10, which stated the Maharaj, his heirs and successors, shall remain absolute rulers of their country, could be fulfilled according to literal interpretation. This, of course, was incompatible with the terms of the supplementary articles, giving power to Zalim Singh and his successors in perpetuity. All attempts at a diplomatic resolution had failed, and by June 1820, the young Maharaj placed himself at the head of around 500 horse, mostly Haras, that's the local Rajput tribe, loyal to the royal family. Todd rushed to Zalim Singh's camp and was reassured by his insistence that he would remain loyal to the Maharaj. Todd then galloped back to the Maharaj's camp and warned them that their position placed them in direct enmity to the British government, and in particular that Gordhandas was a traitor. Rather oddly, I think, Maharaj seems to have just conceded, and Todd accompanied him back to the palace. And Gordhandas was deported back to Delhi as a state criminal. Public reconciliation took place between Zalim Singh and Kishore Singh, who was formally reinstated on the Gadi in August 1820, with Madho Singh, so the new hereditary Faujdar, performing the ritual functions of the hereditary Faujдар. Todd tells us that he remained in Kotah for the whole month after this ceremony to strengthen the good feeling thus begun. Another meeting of all the parties took place on September the 4th. The old regent, Maharaj, and Madho Singh joined hands in reciprocal forgiveness for the past, each uttering a solemn asseveration that he would cultivate harmony in the future. Reassured, Todd left Kotah on September the 10th, 1820. Of course, that wasn't the end of the story. And the following year, permission was granted for Gordhandas to leave Delhi to attend his own wedding. At once, unrest began in Bundi and Kotah, with Saif Ali, commander of the Royal Regiment, mutinying and supporting the Maharaja against Zalim Singh. A skirmish took place and the Maharaja Preeti Singh escaped to Bundi, while Bishan Singh, so that's the middle son, joined the regent. Todd agonizes at length over the effect of the terms of the treaty, but he finally tells us there was but one way to deal with the perplexity, fulfill the spirit of the treaty. British troops from Nimach were sent to capture Gordhandas, who escaped and fled to Malwa, but he was denied asylum there and ended up going back to Delhi. In the meantime, support for the Maharaja, still in Bundi, grew, with the Haras showing loyalty to their ruler. They headed towards Kotah, about 3,000 men reaching the Chambal River towards the end of the monsoon of 1821. Todd comments that this demonstrates the Rajputs' theory of fidelity. Even those closely connected by ties of blood and by every species of benefit withdrew from the regent, to whom they owed everything, in order to join the hereditary and lawful prince, whom some had never seen, and of whom they knew nothing. I think Todd half admires this loyalty to the ruler. He tells us he spent a month trying to reach a peaceful resolution, but he failed, and on September the 16th, he received a written ultimatum from Kishore Singh, which he quotes in full in a footnote in the Annals. The introductory paragraph of the letter demands, "Do me justice as the representative of the British government, and let the master be as master and the servant as servant." He states his confidence in Zalim Singh to serve him and says he agrees his administration of affairs. But between Madho Singh and myself, suspicions and doubts exist. We can never agree. He offers to give him a jagir, in other words, to pay him off. He then sent a copy of the treaty to Todd. Todd says, tauntingly asking him whether it was to be recognized or not. And it's this delay of a month which allowed the Maharaja's supporters to assemble, and which led to the extensive and vituperative correspondence between Todd and Ochterlony, and finally to Todd's dismissal. In the Annals, Todd explains that the rain had swelled the Kali Sindh River, making it impossible for the troops to cross, and that this afforded several more days to try to persuade the Maharaja to give up. Todd failed. To every remonstrance, he replied, "What was life without honor? What was a sovereign without authority?" And the regent was equally intransigent. The love of dominion overcame every scruple. The Battle of Mangrove commenced inevitably on October the 1st, 1821. Quite a big battle. The regent's army consisted of 8 battalions of infantry and 14 of horse, and the British troops, which had been sent in, formed to the right of the regent's force. The Maharaja was supported by the royals, who had deserted their old master, and the elite Hara cavaliers, and also by a tumultuous rabble. Todd tells us combined force was permitted to choose its position within 200 yards of the foe, without the slightest demonstration of resistance or retreat. The agent took advantage of the pause to request the British commander to halt the whole line, in order that he might make a last attempt to withdraw the infatuated prince and his devoted followers from the perils that confronted them. He advanced midway between the lines and offered the same conditions and an amnesty to all to conduct and replace the prince on the gadi of his ancestors with honour. Todd was also censured for this additional delay in the commencement of battle. Zalim Singh's troops, supported by the British, of course, prevailed. Prithi Singh was killed and the Maharaja fled. The regent was instructed to grant a complete amnesty. Mahara chiefs were allowed to return home. In a few weeks, all was tranquility and peace. Kishore Singh had gone to the religious centre of Nathdwara in Mawar, and he soon realised that in order to return to Kotah, he would have to renounce all his ambitions with regard to the treaty. Conditions were agreed for his return to Kotah. Writing on November the 19th, Todd tells us in the personal narrative that the last 3 months have been the most harassing of my existence. Civil war, the death of friends and relatives, cholera raging, and all of us worn out with perpetual attacks of fever, ague, anxiety, and fatigue. Todd went hunting with Zalim Singh and then occupied the time waiting for Kishore Singh to return from Nathdwara by travelling through the Mukundara Pass and visiting Gagraun and Baroli. Some of you will recognise these pictures of the rather wonderful temple at Baroli. In December, Todd returned to Kotah. On the last day of the year, the regent, accompanied by the agent, advanced to reconduct the prince to the capital. The universal demonstration of satisfaction at his return was the most convincing testimony that any other course of action would have been erroneous. On that day, he once more took possession of the gadi, which he had twice abandoned, with a resignation free from all asperity or even embarrassment. Todd remained there a month and effected a reconciliation between the prince and Madho Singh, when the former, with great tact and candour, took upon himself the blame for all these disturbances. The regent carried out a tour of the state to allay fears, and in a few weeks, not a trace was left of the commotions which for a while totally unhinged society. Unfortunately, the aftermath was not so happy for Todd. The government in Delhi conducted an inquiry into the events in Kotah, and having reviewed the correspondence between Kishore Singh and Todd and the reports of Todd's native agent in the Maharaja's camp, had come to the conclusion that Todd had committed a great error in protracting negotiations when the situation was clearly hopeless. It's on this censure that many recent scholars seem to focus. So, for example, Freytag states Todd was sympathetic to the Maharaja's family and even allowed them to get close to Kotah with an armed force. Todd even delayed an attack on them in the ensuing battle with the British Army. This is not what Todd describes in the Annals or in subsequent correspondence, and it's not what Governor General included. The role played by the supplemental articles to the treaty in the whole debacle is debated. An opinion changed over time as fresh evidence of key events came to light. So the letter from Swinton, Secretary to the Government, to Ochterlony, dated the 31st of October 1821, justifies the supplemental articles and the British support of Zalim Singh. But for the ability of the Rajrana Zalim Singh, the country of Kotah would long since have fallen an easy prey to Scindia or Holkar. In the condition we found Kotah, the whole power and resources of the state were in the hands of Zalim Singh, who was universally acknowledged to be the actual ruler of the country. This recognition was professed by no one more distinctly than by Maharaja Umed Singh, who was sensible that had it not been for the talents and vigour of Zalim Singh, he could not for a long series of years have maintained his existence as an independent prince for a day. Since Zalim Singh alone possessed the power and the ability to make peace or war, it was with him alone that the British government could treat as ruler. Consequently, they conclude it's a misapprehension that Kishore Singh is an unfortunate prince deprived of his hereditary dominions, and that the Maharaja Bundi should be called to account for encouraging Kishore Singh to oppose the British government. Peabody considers that while Todd was correct in identifying the subsidiary clauses of the treaty as the cause of the discontent, he was not correct to blame them for enshrining an inherently anomalous relationship between the ruler and the power behind the throne. It was the treaty itself which had created the anomaly by altering the foundations that had so successfully defined their relationship for 50 years. In October 1821, Todd was placed directly under the control of Ochterlony, thus effectively disempowering him and making his position as political agent in Mewar untenable. It was only in February 1822 that Todd wrote to the Secretary of the Government giving his version of events, the letter going initially to Ochterlony to be forwarded. It didn't arrive in Delhi, and at the end of March, Todd communicated directly with Swinton. Swinton clearly thought that Ochterlony had withheld the letter. And he wrote in April 1822, this delay in the receipt of that dispatch is not explained. The original is understood to have been transmitted to you for the purpose, is presumed, of being forwarded to the presidency after perusal. And he goes on to criticize Ochterlony for not going to Kotah himself when he learned of the problems there, and failing to exercise from a distance the powers vested in him. By this time, the government's stance on the treaty had shifted. Swinton writes, the form of government which we found established in Kotah and were bound by every obligation of good faith to maintain is radically vicious. His lordship in council cannot divest himself of the belief that even down to a late period in the recent commotion, a well-timed proposition for the establishing of the family of Zalim Singh in a separate and independent principality on the condition of their relinquishing the administration of Kotah might have been well received and highly convenient to the British government. Todd's letter belatedly explained the reasons for the delay in the commencement of the battle. Because of the weather, it was impossible for the British to bring their artillery into position. And his explanation was accepted. His lordship in council is happy to exonerate Captain Todd from the imputation of delay in commencing active operation in that period. And Ochterlony this time gets a dressing down. Governor General in council desires me to express his concern that the mode of your announcing your assumption of the authority thus vested in you should have been of a nature to impair Captain Todd's authority in the court of Udaipur. But it was all too late, and on February the 18th, 1822, Todd resigned as political agent of Mewar and requested permission to proceed to Europe for his health. Ochterlony commented on Todd's letter. On these pages of inanity, the effusions of wounded vanity, one of the many instances of a man proving their own errors in attempting their defense. He wasn't going to miss any opportunity to criticize Todd. In April 1822, he wrote to Swinton, I have no hesitation in saying a more palpable instance of the injustice combined with incivility never disgraced a British officer in charge of political duties, or a more gross deviation from every principle of rectitude and justice was never exhibited. I have no hesitation in saying that Captain Todd has conducted all his proceedings with an apparent bias and partiality and an abuse of power highly discreditable and, in my opinion, deserving the severest mark of disapprobation of his lordship in council. There's a whole lot more that goes on for pages. However, when he forwarded Todd's last report in June 1822, Ochterlony was much more conciliatory. He said it would be no slight praise to any person to have produced from the chaos of anarchy, confusion, poverty, disorder, and disaffection which he found in the state, anything that had the semblance of a system and had a tendency to repress or ameliorate existing evils. Todd returned to Udaipur for the last time in March 1822 and saw the progress on the house that he was building for himself with a view to remaining in India indefinitely. Right at the end of the Annals, Todd writes sadly of the death of Carey and the ill health of Dr. Duncan, who was about to depart for the Cape, and war left behind at Kotah. I looked on all the works my hands had wrought and on the labour I had laboured to do, and alas, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. He left Udaipur for the last time on June the 1st, and by now he was accompanied by only his Jain guru, Chandra. In this painting of him at Dabok near his house, he still has the escort of Skinner's horse, the yellow boys, but he said goodbye to them and to the servants the next day. He travelled initially to Sirohi, which some of us will be seeing in a few weeks' time, and then to Mount Abu and into Gujarat. His sadness at having to leave is poignant. To all their customs, to all their sympathies, and numerous acts of courtesy and kindness, which have made this not a strange land to me, I am about to bid farewell. Whether a final one is written in that book, which for wise purposes is sealed to mortal vision, but wherever I go, whatever days I may number, nor place nor time can ever weaken, far less obliterate, the remembrance of the valley of Udaipur. Dalim Singh died in May 1824, Ochterlony in July 1825. Todd left India after his journey through Gujarat in January 1823, wrote first the Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, and then the Travels in Western India, published posthumously. He died of apoplexy in his bank in November 1835. He was 53. Thank you.
So thank you very much for a really interesting talk. Now, I would have thought there was nothing more to say about Todd. But I'm pleased, thrilled that there's always more to be gleaned from his story. Yeah, yes, well, there may be some resistance to that. One of the things that I really enjoyed about your presentation today was the way in which you were able to lay out these absolute kaleidoscope of shifting personal and political relations, both amongst the Indians, the Rajputs in particular, but also amongst the British.
Yeah.
And not only were they chopping and changing alliances within each of these communities, but you also showed ways in which sometimes the chopping and changing went across the British Rajput divide, point that one questions the extent of that divide. And it does lead me to the somewhat depressing conclusion that what unites us in our common humanity is our ability to find enemies anywhere, everywhere.
Well, self-interest.
And self-interest, yeah. And so I thought that that rather depressing observation actually came through. I'm afraid it's one I share myself, particularly in this time. I I noted with some humor that your description of the vanity of Ochterlony was wonderful, and it did remind me of just one story about Todd's own vanity, which concerned his meeting with the Maharaja of Jodhpur. And you mentioned that they had very long series of interviews alone without interpreters, and they spoke what Todd described as the Hindustani of Delhi, as the common language, what we would now call Kariboli. Todd at that time had not mastered the local Rajasthani language of northern Rajasthan, Mawari. And at the end of one long 2-hour interview between the two of them, Todd had the gump to praise the Maharaja of Jodhpur on his command of the Indian language. So Ochterlony and Todd were clearly divided a lot on what they share. Common heritage. So I'm wondering if there are any questions from the floor. Yes?
Did you show the picture of, I keep calling Ochterlony,
Yes.
with a harem of women?
Yes.
I don't remember our code.
No, certainly not. In fact, he commented travels in Western India that he celibate.
And maybe
He doesn't seem to have had any relation.
Did he have any relationship with it?
He got married as he got back to Kotah.
I just wondered if there was another scenario.
No, I don't. I really don't. I think he was obsessed with what he was doing, and he was a workaholic. You know, just the sheer volume of stuff wrote notes while he was there, on which he relied on at the end.
1,600 pages.
Was it normal?
I think it was actually on the cusp. The earlier ones, if you've read William Dowland, like Mughal, that's the earlier generation of India Company officials who married Indians and had children by them. You know, it was in the open, but a lot of them had Indian mystery. Ochterlony, I think, comes at the very end of that, and Todd is on the cusp. The Memsahibs arrived in England.
Living on official England. Why I'm asking, remember language Dalrymple, I put down the yearbook of Indian look up salary, so and the diplomatic allowance. Even then,
No.
the likes of Riley, they were expunging off the princes. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that Todd lived the life of life, rather far from the aesthetic. But he was heavily supported by the Maharaja of Jodhpur, who provided him accommodation, staff, horses, everything. So yes, Italy.
I was thinking of various employees that must. You know, the residences were considered extraterritorial areas.
Yes, so they got money from
business people were encouraged to settle there and the pages, the resident. Take from the west.
Yeah. I don't know to what extent odd. Well, one of the things I don't know is who owned the land on which he was building his house. Went to see. Apparently the records that might have been in Jaipur have been destroyed, so I don't think we're ever going to find out what the situation was there. My guess is if after we die.
Yeah.
But it's a fairly modest house. It's not like Ochterlony's house.
Yes.
Am I right in thinking Ochterlony was born, bred in America?
He was, yeah.
But they had anything to do with that.
I wouldn't like to comment. Perhaps Rebecca.
My hometown. I would wholeheartedly support the point that Liz just made about Todd's dependence for a certain level of funding from the Maharana. And that's another interesting facet of the complex relationships between the British and Indian rulers at that time, where it was unclear what who was in an authoritative position, whether an authoritative position could be defined between the two groups at that period.
Well, it certainly seems to have been mutually beneficial.
It was.
No, Ochterlony was his direct superior at the time of that nasty correspondence.
Well, thank you very much. That was a lovely talk, and we look forward. We'll grill you back over a glass of wine.
Yes.
What?